The morning sun cast long shadows across the crystal fields of Theros when the first ships appeared in the sky. Elder Cain had been tending to the healing pools in the sacred grove when the ground beneath his feet began to tremble. The blue-skinned Therosian looked up through the canopy of silver leaves and saw death descending from the heavens. Massive vessels blocked out the light, their hulls dark as the void between stars. They moved with terrible purpose, positioning themselves above the major cities with mechanical precision. Cain had lived for 3 centuries and had seen many wonders among the stars, but never had he witnessed such raw malevolence, made manifest in metal and energy. The first bombardment shattered the peaceful morning like glass. Beams of crimson light lanced down from the ships, turning buildings to vapor and streets to molten rivers. The capital city of New Haven vanished in a pillar of fire that rose into the atmosphere. The screams of his people echoed across the planetary communication network before the transmissions. Went silent one by one. Cain stumbled through the grove as the trees around him withered under the heat of distant explosions. His communicator crackled with desperate voices from the remaining settlements. The Dominion had come to Theros, and they had brought extinction with them. The old Therosian had heard whispers of this reptilian empire that swept across the galaxy, enslaving worlds and harvesting resources, but he had never imagined they would target his peaceful agricultural world. The Sacred Grove's communication array still functioned, protected by ancient energy shields that had weathered countless storms. Cain reached the central transmitter just as another wave of ships descended toward the surviving settlements. He could see the smoke rising from a dozen points on the horizon, where his people had once lived in harmony with the land. His fingers trembled as he activated the quantum beacon. The device hummed to life, its crystalline core pulsing with desperate energy. This was their last hope, their final cry for help before the Dominion silenced Theros forever. The transmission would carry across the galaxy, reaching any civilization advanced enough to receive subspace communications. Cain spoke into the transmitter with a voice heavy with sorrow. He gave their coordinates, described the Dominion fleet composition, and estimated the casualties in the millions. His people were farmers and healers, not warriors. They had no military ships, no weapons capable of challenging the massive dreadnoughts that now controlled their skies. He begged for intervention from any species capable of military action. The elder had studied galactic politics long enough to know that most civilizations would ignore his plea. The Dominion was too powerful, too ruthless in their reprisals against those who interfered with their conquests. Dozens of worlds had already fallen to their fleets, their populations either enslaved or exterminated depending on their usefulness to the Empire. As he spoke, explosions lit the horizon like a chain of false suns. The Dominion ground forces were deploying now, massive transports disgorging armored vehicles and troops to secure the planetary surface. Their tactics were brutally efficient, designed to crush any resistance and process the population for slave labor or elimination. The transmission completed its upload to the quantum beacon. In moments, the signal would propagate through subspace, carrying Theros' death cry to distant stars. Cain prayed to the ancient spirits of his world that someone would hear, that someone would care enough to act. The galaxy had grown cold and cautious, with most species preferring isolation to the risks of interstellar conflict. Through the Grove's sensor network, Cain watched the Dominion forces establish their control grid across the planet. The reptilian soldiers moved with predatory grace, their scaled hides gleaming in the firelight from burning cities. They showed no mercy to civilians, no regard for the agricultural infrastructure that had fed dozens of worlds. They were destroyers, by nature, taking what they needed and leaving only ashes behind. The old Therosian settled beside the transmitter to wait. His own death would come soon enough when the Dominion forces reached the sacred grove, but he would maintain the beacon until his final breath. Perhaps somewhere among the stars, a civilization existed that still remembered honor, that still believed in protecting the innocent from predators. The quantum signal raced across the galaxy, reaching the homeworlds of 100 species. Most governments received the transmission and filed it away with countless other distress calls from doomed worlds. The cost of challenging the Dominion was too high, the risk of retaliation too great. Better to mourn the Therosians in private than join them in extinction. On the Outer Rim territories, however, the signal reached a small blue world where a younger species was taking its first steps onto the galactic stage. The humans had been monitoring subspace communications for decades, cataloging threats and opportunities with the methodical patience that had carried them from their planet's surface to the stars. Admiral Stone sat in the command center of Earth's orbital defense station when the Theros transmission arrived. The weathered human studied the data with growing interest, noting the Dominion fleet composition and tactical deployment. Intelligence reports had marked this reptilian empire as a growing threat, but their operations had remained distant from human space. The Admiral called for a priority briefing with Earth's military leadership. The Therosians were dying while he watched, their peaceful civilization being ground beneath the Dominion's mechanized cruelty. Most species would consider this tragedy just another example of galactic reality, the strong consuming the weak, as they always had, but humans had different ideas about reality. They had fought their way up from a world torn by conflict, learning hard lessons about warfare and survival that most galactic civilizations had never needed to master. The Dominion might be powerful, but they had never faced an enemy like humanity. As Elder Cain maintained his vigil in the sacred grove, watching his world burn around him, he could not know that his desperate signal had reached exactly the right species at exactly the right moment. The humans were coming, and they were bringing the accumulated fury of a species that had never learned to accept injustice quietly. The beacon continued its transmission, carrying the dying screams of Theros across the void, unaware that it had already found its answer among the distant stars. Deep beneath the Swiss Alps, the war room buzzed with tension as Earth's military leadership gathered around a holographic display showing the Theros system. General Blake studied the tactical data while Admiral Stone paced behind him, both men weighing the implications of what they were seeing. The Dominion fleet had positioned itself in a classic occupation formation, confident in their superiority and unconcerned about potential interference. President Williams entered the chamber, with her security detail, her face grim as she took her seat at the head of the conference table. The emergency session had been called within hours of receiving the Therosian distress signal, and the debate that followed would determine humanity's first major military intervention in galactic affairs. Defense Secretary Park activated the main display, showing intelligence reports compiled over months of careful observation. The Dominion Empire stretched across 17 star systems, each conquest following the same brutal pattern. They would arrive without warning, destroy military targets with overwhelming force, then systematically process the population for slave labor or elimination. General Blake highlighted key data points as he spoke. The Dominion relied heavily on energy weapons and shield technology, expecting their enemies to respond with similar equipment. Their tactics were straightforward but effective, using superior firepower to crush resistance before deploying ground forces to secure planetary assets. The debate that followed revealed the divisions within Earth's leadership. Ambassador Chun argued for diplomatic solutions, pointing out that humanity had only recently achieved interstellar capability and lacked the resources for sustained galactic warfare. Economic advisor Lopez raised concerns about the cost of military intervention and the potential for devastating retaliation against human colonies. Admiral Stone cut through the arguments with cold military logic. Intelligence reports indicated that the Dominion had already marked several human settlements for future conquest, viewing Earth's expanding influence as a potential threat to their empire. The choice was not whether to fight the Dominion, but when and where that fight would occur. General Blake activated a new set of displays showing Earth's military capabilities. The Human Defense Force had been preparing for interstellar conflict since first contact with galactic civilization, developing weapons and tactics specifically designed to counter more advanced alien technologies. Their ships carried kinetic weapons that could penetrate energy shields, their soldiers trained in combined arms warfare that most galactic species had never encountered. President Williams listened to the arguments from both sides before making her decision. The Therosians were dying while Earth's leaders debated policy, and intelligence suggested that human colonies would be next on the Dominion's target list. She authorized Operation Thunderstrike, the largest military deployment in human history. The preparation phase began immediately as Admiral Stone returned to the orbital command station. Earth's shipyards had been building a new class of warship for the past 5 years, vessels designed specifically for combat against technologically superior enemies. The ships were smaller than most galactic dreadnoughts but packed with advanced weapon systems and electronic warfare capabilities. The flagship Thunder carried Admiral Stone's battle group, 12 vessels that represented the cutting edge of human military engineering. Their hulls were angular and aggressive, coated with materials designed to absorb and deflect energy weapons. Point defense systems covered every approach vector, while launch tubes carried fusion warheads that could crack the armor of the largest enemy ships. General Blake assembled his ground forces at the Luna training facility, selecting troops from elite units across Earth's military branches. These soldiers had trained in low-gravity environments and urban warfare scenarios, preparing for conflicts that traditional military doctrine could not address. Their powered armor enhanced their natural abilities while providing protection against energy weapons and toxic atmospheres. The loading process took 36 hours as ships took on supplies, ammunition, and personnel. Each vessel carried enough resources for extended operations far from human space, including fabrication equipment to produce replacement parts and weapons. The fleet would be operating without supply lines or reinforcement, dependent entirely on their own capabilities. During the 3-week journey to Theros, the fleet conducted intensive training exercises. Ship crews practiced combat maneuvers, while ground forces ran simulation after simulation of planetary assault operations. Intelligence officers analyzed every scrap of data about Dominion tactics and technology, looking for weaknesses that human forces could exploit. The fleet's approach to the Theros system was carefully planned to maximize tactical advantage. Admiral Stone positioned his ships to drop out of hyperspace at the edge of the system, where long-range sensors could assess the situation before committing to battle. The element of surprise would be crucial in the opening moments of combat. As the Thunder's navigation officer counted down the final moments before arrival, Admiral Stone reviewed the battle plan one final time. The Dominion fleet was larger and more heavily armed, but their commanders had grown overconfident from centuries of easy victories. They would not expect resistance from an unknown species operating far from their home territory, the hyperspace. Window collapsed around the human fleet as they emerged into normal space near Theros. The planet hung before them like a wounded jewel, its surface scarred by orbital bombardment and dotted with the heat signatures of burning cities. Dominion ships maintained lazy patrol patterns around the world, their crews likely celebrating another successful conquest. General Blake monitored the tactical display from the Thunder's war room, watching as reconnaissance drones began mapping Dominion positions on the planetary surface. His ground forces were ready for immediate deployment, their equipment checked and rechecked during the long journey from Earth. The Therosians had been dying for weeks while the human fleet traveled across space, but their suffering was about to end. Admiral Stone opened communications with the Dominion fleet using standard galactic protocols. The message was simple and direct, demanding the immediate withdrawal of all Dominion forces from Theros and the surrounding system. The response came within minutes, a mixture of amusement and contempt from Admiral Corex commanding the occupation fleet. The Dominion commander dismissed the human demands with reptilian arrogance, viewing their small fleet as just another minor species attempting a futile rescue mission. He had destroyed dozens of such efforts over the years and expected this encounter to end the same way. His massive dreadnoughts began moving into attack formation, energy weapons charging for what he assumed would be a brief and decisive engagement. But Admiral Stone had not traveled across the galaxy to issue empty threats or engage in diplomatic posturing. The human fleet was already moving into combat formation, their weapon systems armed and targeting solutions locked onto Dominion vessels. The time for talking had ended before it began. The battle for Theros was about to commence, and the galaxy would learn what happened when humanity answered a cry for help with the full fury of their military might. Admiral Corex studied the approaching human vessels through the viewports of his flagship, the massive dreadnought Bone Crusher. The reptilian commander's scales rippled with what passed for amusement among his species as he observed the strange, angular ships advancing toward his fleet. In 3 centuries of conquest, he had encountered dozens of species foolish enough to challenge Dominion supremacy, and all had met the same fate. The human ships were smaller than his heavy cruisers, their hulls bearing unfamiliar design elements that suggested primitive manufacturing techniques. Corex had reviewed the preliminary scans and found no evidence of advanced shield generators or energy weapon systems. Whatever species had sent these vessels clearly lacked the technological sophistication to pose a meaningful threat to his forces. His tactical officer, a scarred veteran named Threx, activated the fleet's primary weapons array. 12 dreadnoughts and 36 escort vessels turned their guns toward the human formation, enough firepower to reduce a small moon to scattered debris. The Dominion had learned that swift, overwhelming destruction discouraged other species. From attempting similar rescue missions, Corex opened a communication channel to the lead human vessel, intending to offer them one final chance to retreat before their destruction. The response surprised him with its calm professionalism. Admiral Stone's voice carried no fear or uncertainty, only cold determination that reminded the Dominion commander of his own species. Warrior traditions. The negotiation lasted less than 3 minutes before Admiral Stone terminated the communication link. Corex watched the human ships continue their approach, maintaining formation discipline that suggested military training rather than desperate civilian volunteers. Perhaps this species would provide more entertainment than usual before their inevitable defeat. The first exchange of fire began when Corex ordered his heavy cruisers to demonstrate Dominion firepower. Crimson plasma beams lanced across space toward the human formation, each bolt carrying enough energy to vaporize a city block. The Dominion commander expected to see the lead human ship disappear in a ball of superheated gas. Instead, he watched in growing confusion as the human vessels weaved through the incoming fire with impossible agility. Their ships moved like living things, rolling and diving through 3-dimensional space while maintaining their advance toward the Dominion fleet. Point defense systems that Corex had not detected on initial scans began intercepting plasma bolts with streams of kinetic projectiles. The human response came without warning as railguns, mounted along their ships' hulls, spat tungsten penetrators at significant fractions of light speed. The projectiles struck Dominion shields with kinetic energy that bypassed their energy absorption matrices entirely. 3 escort vessels lost shield coverage in the opening seconds of combat, their generators overloaded by impacts they were never designed to withstand. KO Rex snarled orders at his tactical officer as the human fleet pressed their attack. Fusion warheads detonated in precise patterns around Dominion formations, creating overlapping fields of destruction that disrupted shield harmonics and blinded sensor arrays. The humans were fighting with a level of coordination and tactical sophistication that the Dominion had never encountered before. The battle quickly evolved beyond Corex's experience as human ships demonstrated capabilities that defied conventional military doctrine. They moved independently rather than maintaining rigid formations, each vessel adapting its tactics to exploit weaknesses in Dominion defenses. Electronic warfare systems jammed communications and sensor networks, while kinetic weapons continued their devastating assault on shield generators aboard the Thunder. Admiral Stone monitored the engagement from his command center while tactical officers coordinated the fleet's assault. The Dominion ships were powerful but predictable, relying on brute force tactics that human strategists had been studying for months. Their shields were impressive against energy weapons but vulnerable to kinetic penetrators moving at relativistic velocities. The tide of battle shifted dramatically when the human destroyers Phoenix and Valkyrie executed a coordinated attack on the Dominion flagship. Their railguns fired synchronized volleys that overwhelmed the Bone Crusher's point defenses, sending tungsten rods through the ship's primary shield array and into its armored hull. Secondary explosions rippled along the massive vessel's superstructure. As critical systems failed, Corax felt his ship shudder under the impacts as damage reports flooded his command center. The humans had somehow penetrated armor that had withstood plasma cannon fire from the galaxy's most advanced civilizations. Emergency bulkheads sealed hull breaches while repair teams rushed to restore power to damaged systems. The psychological impact on Dominion crews was immediate and devastating. For centuries, their ships had been symbols of invincible power, capable of reducing any opposition to radioactive ash. Now they found themselves under attack by an unknown species whose weapons could actually hurt them. Panic began spreading through the fleet as more ships reported shield failures and hull breaches. General Blake watched the space battle from the Thunder's secondary command center while preparing his ground assault forces. The Dominion fleet was in disarray, but their garrison troops on Theros still posed a significant threat to the surviving Therosian population. His soldiers were ready for immediate deployment once the orbital defenses were neutralized. The breakthrough came when human electronic warfare specialists succeeded in jamming Dominion fleet communications. Individual ships found themselves isolated and unable to coordinate their responses to human attack patterns. Admiral Stone exploited the confusion by concentrating his fire on single targets, overwhelming their defenses before moving to the next vessel in sequence, the escort vessel. Dark Talon disappeared in a pillar of nuclear fire when fusion warheads penetrated its compromised shields. The explosion lit up space like a brief star, its shockwave damaging nearby Dominion ships and sending debris cascading across their formation. For the first time in centuries, Dominion crews began to understand what it felt like to be helpless prey. Corax realized that his fleet was facing defeat at the hands of a species he had dismissed as primitive. The humans fought with a combination of advanced technology and tactical flexibility that the Dominion military had never developed. Their smaller ships were actually advantages in combat, allowing them to maneuver and concentrate firepower in ways that massive dreadnoughts could not match. The Admiral activated his ship's emergency beacon, sending a distress signal to Dominion High Command that would take weeks to reach their nearest base. His proud fleet was being systematically destroyed by an enemy that should not have posed any threat to their technological supremacy. The message would warn other Dominion forces about this new species and their devastating military capabilities. More Dominion ships fell to human weapons. General Blake received authorization to begin the planetary assault. Dropships launched from the Thunder and her escorts, carrying powered infantry toward the surface while the space battle continued to rage overhead. The Therosians would soon learn that their desperate plea for help had reached exactly the right species. The first wave of human soldiers descended through Theros' atmosphere like falling stars, their armor glowing with re-entry heat as they approached designated landing zones. Below them, Dominion ground forces prepared defensive positions, unaware that they were about to face an enemy whose understanding of warfare had been forged in the crucible of their own world's bloodiest conflicts. Elder Kane emerged from his shelter in the sacred grove to witness the human assault beginning. After weeks of despair and death, hope had finally arrived from the stars in the form of warriors who fought with both fury and precision. The liberation of Theros was about to begin. The dropships cut through Theros' burning atmosphere like knives through flesh, their heat shields glowing white-hot as they descended toward the ruined capital city. Inside the lead transport, Sergeant Rio checked his squad's equipment one final time while the ship shuddered under atmospheric stress. 24 human soldiers sat in powered armor that made them look like mechanical angels of death, their weapons locked and loaded for the combat ahead. Through the ship's small viewports, Rio could see the devastation that the Dominion had inflicted on New Haven. What had once been a beautiful city of crystal spires and floating gardens was now a smoking crater surrounded by rubble and twisted metal. Dominion ground forces had established their command center in the ruins, confident that no rescue would come for the conquered Therosians. The transport's pilot called out altitude warnings as they approached the drop zone. Rio activated his squad's communication network, coordinating with other teams scattered across multiple landing sites around the city. General Blake had planned the assault with mathematical precision, positioning human forces to cut off Dominion escape routes while avoiding areas where Therosian civilians might be sheltering. The first indication that something was wrong came when Dominion anti-aircraft batteries opened fire on the descending transports. The reptilian gunners had expected to face standard galactic assault craft, slow and heavily armored vessels that relied on shields and thick hull plating for protection. Instead, they found themselves trying to track targets that moved like fighter aircraft while carrying full loads of assault troops, human dropships, twisted through the defensive fire with computer-assisted agility. Their pilots trained in evasive maneuvers that most galactic species considered impossible for transport. Vehicles, electronic warfare pods jamming Dominion targeting systems while decoy flares confused heat-seeking missiles. The transports reached their landing zones with minimal casualties, depositing their human cargo in the heart of enemy territory. Rio's boots hit Therosian soil just as his transport lifted off to avoid incoming artillery fire. Around him, 23 other soldiers fanned out into combat formation, their armor's camouflage systems adapting to the local environment within seconds. The powered suits enhanced their natural abilities while providing protection against energy weapons and the planet's slightly toxic atmosphere. The squad moved through the ruins with practiced efficiency, using hand signals and encrypted communications. To coordinate their advance, Dominion forces had established defensive positions throughout the city, but their tactics were designed for conventional warfare against enemies, who would announce their presence with orbital bombardments and massed infantry assaults. Human soldiers fought differently. They moved through buildings and underground passages, using the urban environment to mask their approach while calling in precision strikes from the fleet overhead. Rio led his team through a collapsed shopping district where Therosian families had once gathered to trade goods and share news. Now the area served as a maze of rubble and twisted metal that provided perfect cover for infiltration. The first contact came when Rio's point man spotted a Dominion patrol moving through what had been the city's central plaza. 6 reptilian soldiers in powered armor marched in formation, their plasma rifles held ready as they searched for signs of resistance. They never saw the humans watching them from concealed positions among the debris. Rio coordinated the ambush with clinical precision. His marksman took position while the heavy weapons specialist prepared anti-armor charges. The engagement lasted less than 30 seconds, beginning when human snipers eliminated the patrol's communications specialist and ending when fusion grenades reduced the entire squad to scattered atoms. The efficiency of the attack shocked Dominion commanders, monitoring the battle from their fortified command post. They had expected human forces to engage in the same crude frontal assaults that characterized most galactic militaries. Instead, their patrols were disappearing without warning, eliminated by an enemy that struck from shadows and vanished before reinforcements could respond. Colonel Voss, commanding the Dominion ground forces, studied tactical displays that showed human units operating throughout the city. The enemy had somehow deployed significant numbers of troops without triggering his early warning systems, suggesting stealth capabilities that exceeded anything in databases. His forces were being systematically hunted by predators that understood urban warfare better than any species he had encountered. Rio's squad reached their primary objective just as the sun set over the devastated city. The Dominion had converted a Therosian medical center into a processing facility where captured civilians were sorted for slave labor or elimination. The building's crystal walls had been reinforced with armored plates while energy barriers protected the entrances. The assault on the facility demonstrated the full spectrum of human military capabilities. Electronic warfare specialists disabled the building's security systems, while combat engineers prepared shaped charges to breach the reinforced walls. Sniper teams established overwatch positions to eliminate sentries while assault troops moved into position for the final attack. The breach came at precisely midnight when shaped charges Blue gaps in the facility's walls while electromagnetic pulse weapons disabled Dominion electronics. Human soldiers poured through the openings like a tide of armored death, their weapons spitting streams of hypervelocity rounds that punched through reptilian armor with devastating effect. Inside the facility, Rio found hundreds of Therosian prisoners crammed into holding cells designed for a fraction of their number. The blue-skinned aliens looked up at their rescuers with wonder and disbelief, unable to comprehend that salvation had arrived in the form of armored warriors from a distant star. Many had given up hope of ever seeing their families again. The Dominion guards had expected to face a conventional assault that would give them time to execute their prisoners rather than allow them to be freed. Instead, they found themselves overwhelmed by enemies who moved with impossible speed and coordination. Human soldiers neutralized threats with precision that spared civilian lives while eliminating every reptilian trooper in the building. Colonel Voss received reports of similar defeats throughout the city as human forces systematically dismantled his defensive network. His troops were trained for conventional warfare against enemies who fought with honor and predictable tactics. These humans showed no such limitations, striking at weak points with surgical precision while avoiding any engagement that did not favor their forces. The psychological impact on Dominion troops was devastating. For centuries they had been the predators of the galaxy, feared by every species for their ruthless efficiency and overwhelming firepower. Now they found themselves being hunted by creatures that seemed to understand warfare on a fundamental level that they had never achieved. The battle for the command post began when human artillery eliminated the facility's shield generators with pinpoint orbital strikes. General Blake had positioned his ships to provide fire support without risking collateral damage to civilian areas, using targeting data provided by ground reconnaissance teams to guide their weapons. Rio's squad joined the final assault on the command center, advancing through corridors lined with the bodies of Dominion defenders who had tried to stop the human advance. The powered armor gave them advantages in close combat that reptilian warriors could not match, allowing them to move faster and strike harder than their enemies expected. Colonel Voss made his final stand in the facility's central command chamber, surrounded by his remaining officers and elite guards. The Dominion commander had fought in dozens of campaigns across the galaxy, but he had never faced enemies like these humans. They moved like ghosts through his defenses, striking where he was weakest and vanishing before he could respond. The end came when human combat engineers breached the command chamber's armored doors with thermite charges. Rio led the assault team through the smoke and flames, his squad's weapons cutting down the last defenders with ruthless efficiency. Colonel Voss died with a human fusion rifle pointed at his skull, his final thoughts focused on warning his superiors about this terrible new enemy. As dawn broke over New Haven, human forces controlled the entire city while Dominion survivors fled toward their orbital transports. The liberation of Theros was nearly complete, achieved through a combination of superior tactics, advanced technology, and the kind of warrior discipline that most galactic species had never developed. The galaxy was about to learn what happened when humanity went to war. 3 days after the last Dominion transport fled Theros' orbit, Elder Kane stood among the ruins of New Haven watching human soldiers distribute medical supplies to the surviving population. The ancient Therosian had lived through 3 centuries of peace before witnessing his world's near destruction, and now he was seeing something equally unprecedented in galactic history. Warriors who had come seeking battle were staying to heal the wounds they had helped create. The human fleet maintained position around Theros while repair crews worked to restore planetary infrastructure. Admiral Stone had established orbital stations to coordinate relief efforts, but his primary focus remained on the strategic implications of their victory. Intelligence reports indicated that news of the Dominion defeat was spreading rapidly through subspace communications, reaching civilizations across the galaxy within hours. On the planet's surface, General Blake supervised the establishment of defensive positions while his engineers worked to repair the communication networks that would allow Theros to reconnect with galactic civilization. The human commander understood that military victory was meaningless without political consolidation, and the coming weeks would determine whether their intervention led to lasting peace or merely delayed the next Dominion assault. The first diplomatic contacts arrived within a week as representatives from dozens of species requested permission to visit the liberated world. Elder Kane found himself serving as an unofficial ambassador between his people and the flood of alien dignitaries who wanted to witness the aftermath of humanity's stunning military success. Many had never seen the results of Dominion occupation, having preferred to ignore the Empire's brutalities rather than risk retaliation. Ambassador Chun arrived from Earth aboard the diplomatic vessel Harmony, carrying authorization from President Williams to negotiate humanity's entry into galactic politics. The veteran diplomat had spent years studying alien cultures and their complex relationships, but the situation on Theros presented challenges that no amount of preparation could have anticipated. Humanity had announced its presence on the galactic stage with overwhelming violence, and now they had to convince other species that they could be trusted with such power. The Galactic Council convened an emergency session to address the Dominion defeat and its implications for interstellar law. Many member species had quietly supported the Reptilian Empire's expansion, viewing their conquests as a stabilizing force that prevented smaller conflicts from erupting across the galaxy. Now they faced the uncomfortable reality that their policy of appeasement had enabled genocide on an industrial scale. Elder Kane addressed the council via quantum communicator from the rebuilt Sacred Grove. His words carried to representatives of over 200 species scattered across known space. He spoke of his people suffering under Dominion occupation and their gratitude toward the humans who had answered their desperate plea for help. The Therosian leader's testimony provided undeniable evidence of the Empire's crimes and the moral justification for humanity's intervention. The debate that followed revealed the deep divisions within galactic civilization. Conservative factions argued that humanity's actions constituted an illegal act of war that threatened the established balance of power. Progressive voices countered that the Dominion's systematic enslavement and extermination of peaceful species demanded military intervention regardless of legal technicalities. General Blake listened to the proceedings from his command post on Theros while monitoring intelligence reports about Dominion fleet movements. Enemy forces were withdrawing from several occupied systems, apparently unwilling to risk confrontation with human military units. The psychological impact of their defeat was spreading faster than any physical advance could have achieved. The turning point came when Ambassador Chun addressed the council directly, speaking not as a representative of Earth but as a voice for all species that had suffered under Dominion oppression. She presented evidence of the Empire's crimes collected by human intelligence services, including recordings of mass executions and detailed documentation of slave labor operations. The material was too extensive and too horrific for even the most conservative council members to dismiss. The vote to censure the Dominion passed by a narrow margin, but the resolution to welcome humanity into the galactic community faced stronger opposition. Many species feared that Earth's military capabilities would destabilize the careful balance of power that had maintained relative peace for centuries. Others worried that human intervention would set a precedent for military action that could escalate into full-scale interstellar warfare. Elder Kane provided the deciding argument when he proposed the establishment of a permanent human military base in the Theros system. The facility would serve as both a symbol of humanity's commitment to galactic peace and a practical deterrent against future Dominion aggression. Other species that had suffered under the Empire's expansion quickly endorsed the proposal, seeing it as protection against future attacks. The construction of Firebase Alpha began within months of the council vote, with human engineers working alongside Therosian architects to design a facility that would serve military and humanitarian purposes. The base would house a full battle group while providing disaster relief capabilities for the surrounding star systems. It represented a new model of interstellar cooperation that many species found both inspiring and intimidating. Admiral Stone oversaw the base's construction from his flagship while monitoring the broader strategic situation. Dominion forces had withdrawn from their forward positions, but intelligence suggested they were consolidating their remaining fleets for a counterattack. The Reptilian Empire would not accept defeat quietly, and humanity needed to prepare for the larger war. That was likely coming. The first test of the new alliance came when another distress signal reached human space, this time from the mining world of Kefalos in the Outer Rim territories. Dominion raiders had attacked the planet's orbital facilities, killing thousands of workers and stealing processed rare metals needed for starship construction. The local government requested immediate military assistance under the mutual defense provisions of their treaty with Earth. General Blake led the response mission aboard the assault carrier Thunderbolt, taking with him a mixed force of human troops and volunteers from species that had joined the anti-Dominion coalition. The expedition represented the first joint military operation in galactic history, with soldiers from a dozen different worlds working together under unified command. The battle for Kefalos lasted 3 days and ended with the complete destruction of the Dominion raiding force. More importantly, it demonstrated that the alliance forged at Theros could function effectively in combat operations. Human tactical doctrines adapted to incorporate the unique capabilities of alien allies, while maintaining the aggressive precision that had made their initial victory possible. Elder Kane watched the news reports from his rebuilt grove, seeing images of human and alien soldiers working together to rebuild the damaged mining facilities. The old Therosian had lived long enough to witness the birth of something genuinely new in galactic politics. Fear was being replaced by hope as species that had cowered before Dominion power began to believe that resistance was possible. The final diplomatic breakthrough came when several Dominion client states announced their independence from the Empire, citing humanity's protection guarantee as justification for their rebellion. The reptilian government's response was swift and brutal, but their expeditionary forces found themselves facing human battle groups that seemed to appear wherever Dominion ships attempted to restore order. President Williams addressed the United Nations and the Galactic Council simultaneously, announcing Earth's commitment to defending any species threatened by the Dominion's imperial ambitions. The declaration marked humanity's formal emergence as a galactic superpower, backed by military capabilities that had proven themselves in combat against the galaxy's most feared empire. The Dominion's response came in the form of a massive fleet assembled at their capital world, over 300 ships representing the full might of their military machine. Intelligence reports suggested they were planning a direct assault on Earth itself, hoping to eliminate the source of resistance before it could spread further across the galaxy. The Reptilian High Command had made a fatal miscalculation, assuming that humanity's homeworld would be as vulnerable as the agricultural colonies they were accustomed to conquering. Admiral Stone received authorization to deploy Earth's entire space fleet in defense of the Sol system, positioning battle groups at strategic points throughout human space. The Dominion would find no easy targets among Earth's colonies, each one now protected by orbital defense platforms and rapid response forces trained in the brutal lessons learned at Theros. The psychological transformation of galactic civilization was perhaps more significant than any military victory. Species that had accepted Dominion dominance for centuries began to remember what it meant to resist tyranny, inspired by humanity's example and protected by their growing alliance network. Rebellions erupted across the Empire as subject worlds threw off the chains of reptilian oppression. Elder Kane lived to see his world become the symbolic heart of the new galactic order, with the sacred grove serving as a memorial to all species that had suffered under Dominion rule. The ancient Therosian understood that his desperate distress signal had done more than save his people. It had awakened something in the galaxy that had been dormant for too long. The age of unchallenged tyranny was ending, replaced by an era where the strong protected the weak rather than preying upon them. As human ships patrolled the trade routes that had once been hunting grounds for Dominion raiders, the galaxy slowly began to heal from centuries of oppression. The species from the small blue world had proven that military might combined with moral purpose could reshape the cosmos itself. Humanity had answered one alien cry for help with vengeance, and in doing so had transformed the very nature of interstellar civilization. The stars themselves seemed brighter now that freedom had found its champions among the distant worlds, and the echoes of that first desperate transmission from Theros would resonate across the galaxy for generations to come.